Hello, fellow book lovers, both readers and writers. I am Maddie Dalrymple. I am the author of the Ann Kinner suspense novels and suspense shorts and the Lizzie Ballard thrillers. And I also write, speak, podcast, and consult on the writing craft and the publishing voyage as the indie author. And you can find out more about me at maddiedalrymple.com and at theindieauthor.com. And this is my video series, What I Learned, where I get to ask authors 2 questions related to their latest book. What did they learn from their latest book that they'd like to share with their fellow authors? And what did they learn from their latest book that they'd like to share with their fellow readers? And today my guest is Constance Hays Matsumoto. Hey, Constance, how are you doing?
Hi, Maddie. I'm great. Thank you for inviting me to chat today.
I am pleased to have you here. To give our viewers a little bit of background on you, Constance Hays Matsumoto is a former denizen of the corporate world, as I am, and an interior design devotee who later embraced the art and rigor of creative writing. Inspired by Shakespeare's What's Past is Prologue, Connie writes stories and poetry intended to influence positive change in our world. Connie is a member of the Authors Guild, the Eastern Shore Writers Association, Historical Novel Society, and the Women's National Book Association, and served on the board of directors of Maryland's Writers Association. And her debut book is Of White Ashes. And so today I'm going to be asking Connie the 2 What I Learned questions, starting out with, what did you learn from Of White Ashes that you'd like to share with your fellow authors?
Wow, that's such a great question with an audience of authors like me. So I came into writing from the corporate world and the design world, and I dove into the deep end of learning craft. And because I had this business background, I decided early on to spend a good chunk of time focused on not only writing, but also the publishing industry and being a good literary citizen, joining community. And so the way that I like to think about it is I had this pie of time and I took 50% of my time for the book and focused on writing. And then the other 25% was learning the publishing industry, which is a beast. And then the other 25% was spent joining community and being a good literary citizen. And I've talked to people about this, and many people think about this like networking, and that networking has this negative connotation that you're just in it to get a job, what's in it for me. It's all
Exactly.
about what's in it for me, which I've always believed, even when I was in corporate America, is the wrong way to look at it. It's really about being of service to others. And that when you do that, the gift comes back to you. And I have learned that there is nothing like the writing community. This community of people are the kindest, most giving and generous people that I've ever met. And early on, I needed support. I needed to find people who could help me on this journey, which was very new to me. So I joined the critique group at my library, and then I became involved in the organizations that you talked about. And you just never know where that's going to take you, what's going to open up, what possibilities are there until you put yourself out there and really become engaged in that community of writers. The other thing that I've learned is on the publishing side, I think a lot of authors they overestimate what to expect from their publishers, even if it's a big 5 publisher. And if you wait until your book's ready to launch to prepare a marketing plan, to really nail who is the audience, where are my readers, how am I going to reach them, how am I going to let people know about this book, why is this book important, and all of the things around where you're going to put your book. Is your goal for the book to be in bookstores or libraries or schools? All of these goals matter in choosing which publishing path to take. And so I think it's really important to spend a good chunk of time focused on that early on so that you're not surprised. I met this wonderful author who released a terrific historical novel. My book, Of White Ashes, is historical fiction. And he was with one of the big five, and he really believed that he would have all of this tremendous support when the book launched, and he didn't. And he was devastated. And you really only have one opportunity to launch a book. And so it's really incumbent upon us authors to figure all of that out early on, which kind of takes me back to the literary citizen piece of it. If you're involved in that and you're going to workshops and conferences and chatting with other people, you just absorb so many things that are going to be beneficial at the time of a book launch.
Yeah, what you're saying about several of those things reminds me of a conversation I had on the podcast with Leslie Penelope, who had independently published her books, and then the books were picked up by a traditional publisher. Very unusual path. So she was very explicit about saying, don't decide this is your business plan because this is really kind of the unicorn scenario. But I thought it was interesting. I can't remember if she specifically talked about what publishers don't do for people anymore, but many of my guests have who have experience on both the indie and the traditionally publishing side. And they even used her book covers. The book covers she had designed for herself when she was indie, they used those, which I thought was both telling of their business approach, but also a compliment to Leslie about the quality of the book covers she had designed, to know that the traditional publisher had no interest in switching those out once they picked up her books.
That is interesting. It must have been a really terrific cover. So
Yeah.
congratulations to her. Our book, I co-wrote this book of White Ashes with my husband, Kent, and we are published by Loyola University in Maryland. Their press there is Apprentice House Press. And I couldn't be happier. We have to do a lot on our own, but realistically, probably, unless you're one of those books that they pick and that book covers up on the building in Times Square, you really have to do a lot on your own anyway. And with going this route, we had so much more input into every aspect of the book. And it was such a collaborative process. So really weighing those things, who's your audience, what's important to you, how much control do you want or not want? All of that is just so relevant to where your book lands for you to have a good experience with it.
Did you feel as if your decision about who the audience was changed from the point you started working on the book to when you finished it and found a publisher for it and started working with a publisher on getting it to that audience?
Now, it didn't change. Our intended audience has always been adults, young adults, juniors, seniors in high school, libraries, and schools. And we also wanted it in bookstores. And so the best path for us was a traditional publishing path. And then it was a matter of, do we want to go the big five route, or do we want to stick with a smaller press? And about 6 months into the querying of agent process, we decided that a smaller press would better serve us because I learned a whole lot more in that 6 months about around the publishing industry. And is this a path that I really want to take where if we were to get the book with an agent, it could take a year or so for them to sell the book to a publisher. And then it's another 2 years until publication. Where the small press, we have all of the benefits of distribution, all of the benefits of being on a bookstore shelf and a library shelf that were important to us. But the book was finished within a year and published within a year of beginning the process.
It is sort of easy shorthand to say indie versus traditional, but it's really more of a spectrum. You have extremes on either end, but then you have lots and lots of gradations in between.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
as the different authors and different publishers pick different, tweak the model to serve the group of readers or the group of authors that they want to serve.
Yes.
I always like the phrase, I like to use nautical metaphors for the writing craft and the publishing voyage, as people can see. I have a poster of a boat on my wall,
Really,
and I always think that a rising tide raises all boats is more true in the author world than probably in any other professional group, just as you were saying early on.
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. Now, let's turn our attention to what did you learn that you'd like to share with your fellow readers?
Well, the unexpected piece of all of this was the co-author process with my husband, Kent. And so we didn't start out intending to write Of White Ashes. I'm going to show a picture of the children.
Absolutely.
So this is the book of White
Mhm.
Ashes. Well, hiding Kent's name there.
And make sure all the author names show.
This book is inspired by the true stories of Kent's parents. Kent is Japanese American. His mom was in the camps during World War II. His dad, also an American, is a Hiroshima survivor. And since I met Kent 27 years ago, I have felt an increasing sense of urgency that the story really needed to be shared. But it was a story. I always thought about it as a story. And we actually tried to have a nonfiction author who was interested in this project write the book. But Kent's parents really weren't interested in talking with him. And then we tried a different path with making it into a documentary, and they weren't interested in that either. And so years ticked by, and it was in 2017 that I decided I was going to jump into the deep end and take this project on. And then Kent, within a year or two of that, jumped in with me as a collaborator. And so, especially during COVID, the two of us became very close and attached to the book. And he was more closely attached to the book than he ever was in the beginning. And as I said before, it was a story. But then the story became more of, there was more of a need for us to want to share the importance of the story with others. And so we decided to donate a percent of our author royalties to the Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages Organization. The acronym is JAMP, J-A-M-P. JAMP plans pilgrimages to the different incarceration sites around the country to keep those stories alive. We spent the first week of May in Jerome, Arkansas, where Kent's mom was first interned behind barbed wire, and met people who they're still living. There's not a lot of them. There was George, 104 years old, was there, sharp as the whip, just so kind and so giving with sharing his story. But now the younger generations are becoming more interested in these stories, and they're showing up for their grandparents. And so for us to be able to help keep that going is something that was very unexpected. We didn't start out that way. But as things were revealed, this sharing the story just became that much more important. So it wasn't about as much about the story, but about the events and not allowing these events to happen again. And this country, mass incarceration based on race, purely on race, which was the case. And now we have Putin being very loud and terrorizing Ukraine and threatening nuclear destruction. And nuclear bombs today are so many-fold more powerful than they were in Hiroshima, which was an absolute catastrophe. And so that was unexpected for us to take on this role of a common purpose together in this area as a couple. At its core, Of White Ashes is a love story. It's a story of Kent's love for America, despite their circumstances. It's a love story between them. And it has ended up strengthening the love story that Kent and I share, which is really wonderful and quite unexpected.
Yeah, that's a lovely result of that collaboration. And I think it's very interesting that I don't know that I've ever spoken to an author who had to choose how to share a story because of the willingness of their sources to how they wanted to share that. So I'm gathering that Kent's parents were willing to speak with you and Kent about things that they were not comfortable speaking with to a documentary producer or a ghostwriter or a nonfiction author, other than the two of you. Is that correct?
Sort of. So, what's really interesting about this, Maddie, is as Kent says, sometimes it takes an outsider to see the uniqueness in a story. For him, his parents were just mom and dad. And his parents did not talk with him or his brother or sister about their experiences. We now have a deeper appreciation for why that is. It's certainly a generational thing. People coming out of World War II, as a matter of practice, find it really hard to talk about the experiences. On the Japanese American side, there's a large cultural element to it. And I really, when you strip it all down, I think the Kent's parents just simply didn't want to burden their children with their trauma. But when I asked, they would answer my questions. And Kent's mom wrote things down. She put together a binder while she was still living of a family history and a narrative around that history for both herself and her husband. And so, did they want to talk with anybody about it? No. What would they think about the book today? I don't know. I only hope that we wrote it within the guardrails of deep love and respect for them. And we hope the book is something that they would be proud of. And we hope that our readers take away from having read Of White Ashes a deeper sense of urgency around the fragility of our world and relationship in one another with one another as humans. We were at a wedding on Saturday in Baltimore, Maryland. A dear friend of mine, her daughter, who was Christian, married a Jewish guy. And I had never been to a Jewish wedding before. And it was so much fun. And so they had the Christian component to it. And then the rabbi was there. And before they broke the glass, she gave her interpretation. Apparently, there are many out there around why do you break a glass at a Jewish wedding? And her interpretation is that glass it's strong, very strong, and it's also very fragile. And when it's broken, you can't put it back together again. And I think about our world and our relationships with one another that way as well. Our world is very strong and also very fragile at the same time and couldn't sustain any kind of sustained nuclear activity. It just couldn't. And we as people living in the United States right now, we're a very divided nation. And so how can we be a little more empathetic to others, a little more open to their stories and their differences and meet people where they are? And so maybe this book has the opportunity to do that. I think fiction can do that because it helps to put people in the shoes of the characters that lived through these historic events and to feel what they felt. And so, yeah, that's a big hope and dream for the book.
That's a big hope, but it's a lovely hope. It's a lovely goal for a book to have. And I think our viewers will want to find out more about where they can learn more about Of White Ashes. Can you tell them where to go for that information?
Sure. We have a website. It is matsumotobooks.com, Matsumoto, books.com. But the book is available wherever books are sold. So your local bookstore can order it for you. Libraries are beginning to get it in. If you asked your library and they don't have it, maybe you could request that they carry it. It just came out on May 1st. And of course, online, Amazon, Bookshop, and Barnes and Noble.
Great. Thank you so much, Connie. This has been such a lovely conversation.
Thank you, Maddie. I really enjoyed speaking with you today.